Bonjour tout le monde. On vient de terminer le sommet du G20 ici en Indonésie. On a discuté des enjeux comme la guerre brutale de la Russie en Ukraine, l'insécurité alimentaire et l'inflation mondiale exacerbée par cette invasion et les changements climatiques. J'en ai aussi profité pour annoncer des éléments de notre nouvelle stratégie Indo-Pacifique. L'Indo-Pacifique, incluant l'Indonésie où on se trouve aujourd'hui, est une région qui a énormément de potentiel pour l'économie canadienne. I've been very clear during this G20 that Russia's brutal war in Ukraine is appalling. After we learned the news of an explosion in Poland near the Ukrainian border, G7 leaders and other NATO allies had an important emergency meeting this morning. We need to remain calm, and that we need to gather the facts and find out exactly what happened with a full investigation. Après avoir appris les nouvelles d'une explosion en Pologne, près de la frontière ukrainienne, les dirigeants du G7, avec des alliés de l'OTAN, ont organisé une rencontre d'urgence. C'est important de rester calme et d'enquêter pour comprendre exactement ce qui s'est passé. One thing that's certain is that the loss of life in Poland was a consequence of Russia's latest indiscriminate attacks on Ukrainians. Russia firing a barrage of missiles during the G20 summit, which they were a part of, proves their reckless behavior and their blatant disregard for the international system. These missiles are killing innocent people and destroying civilian buildings, and are yet another demonstration of why it's so essential to continue supporting Ukraine. This afternoon, the British Prime Minister and I spoke with President Zelensky. We conveyed our condolences for the terrible loss of life as a result of Russian attacks. We stressed the importance of a full investigation into what happened in Poland, and we made it clear that Putin's invasion of Ukraine is ultimately to blame for this violence. I also had a call with President Duda of Poland. I offered my condolences and offered support for the investigation that will get to the bottom of what happened. Since the beginning of Russia's invasion, the Polish government and the Polish people have stood strong and stepped up for Ukrainians. We share their sorrow as we salute their strength and resolve. Canada and our allies are unified behind Ukraine. This week, we announced that Canada will provide $500 million in additional military assistance for Ukraine, which builds on the $500 million from Budget 2022. In addition, we're extending the Canadian Armed Forces training mission of recruits of the Armed Forces of Ukraine in the UK for another year until the end of December 2023. This week, we also sanctioned 23 individuals responsible for human rights violations against Russian opposition leaders. Those who support this invasion need to be held accountable, and we'll use every tool at our disposal. This war is, of course, tragic for Ukraine, and it's also bad for all of us, for all G20 countries, and indeed for the whole world. It's disrupting supply chains, it's creating global inflation and food and energy crises, and making life more expensive for people everywhere. This instability has repercussions for everyone. If we want to make our world more stable and our communities safer, we also have to fight climate change and protect the environment everywhere. This week, we're announcing new initiatives to do just that. We're supporting Indonesia as it scales up its adaptation efforts, including in response to rising sea levels. In addition, with partners here in Indonesia, we'll help protect or restore tens of thousands of hectares of tropical coastal vegetation. By keeping this vegetation healthy, we'll prevent biodiversity loss. And we're fighting climate change because mangroves, tidal marshes, and seagrasses store even more emissions than forests on land. We'll be building on our work here to protect nature and harness its power to fight climate change as we welcome the world to Montreal for the Nature COP in just a few weeks. A gathering of the world's major economies like the G20 also provides opportunity to foster cooperation on sustainable economic growth. On Monday, I spoke in front of a room full of business leaders from around the world. They know that Canada is a stable place to invest because we have the values that make us a reliable partner, the raw materials and trade access, and we have a skilled and ambitious workforce. I made it clear that Canada is rapidly becoming the energy and tech supplier a net zero world will need. We're focusing on the whole supply chain. Auto workers building electric vehicles in Ontario, with batteries built in Quebec, from nickel and lithium mined in northern Canada. Because of the work our government has been doing in partnership with the private sector, Canada now ranks second in the world on battery supply chain. This is proof that fighting climate change and creating good, sustainable jobs go hand in hand. Hier, pendant l'événement de partenariat pour les infrastructures mondiales et l'investissement, on a fait une annonce pour aider à répondre aux besoins en matière d'infrastructures durables dans l'Indo-Pacifique. On facilite donc les investissements dans les énergies renouvelables tout en créant des opportunités d'affaires pour des entreprises canadiennes. Ici, en Indonésie, ces partenariats vont aider à bâtir des infrastructures pour être moins dépendants du charbon et réduire la pollution. En renforçant nos liens avec nos partenaires ici et en développant de nouvelles relations, on continue notre travail pour aider nos entreprises canadiennes à prospérer et pour créer des bons emplois pour la classe moyenne. Si on veut faire croître notre économie, il faut s'assurer que les gens restent en santé. Et si on veut que les Canadiens soient plus en sécurité contre la COVID-19 et d'autres virus, il faut que les gens ailleurs dans le monde le soient aussi. C'est pour ça qu'on va investir dans le Fonds de lutte contre la pandémie, une initiative du G20 gérée par la Banque mondiale. On va aussi investir pour aider les autres pays à produire et développer des vaccins à ARNM en Afrique, en Amérique latine et dans la Caraïbe. I want to thank Indonesia for hosting this G20 summit in a very difficult time. But look at what we're talking about here and what it means to Canadians and people around the world. Biodiversity, climate change, inflation, and of course, the impacts of Russia's illegal war. Global challenges require global solutions, and organizations like the G20 delivering for our citizens are vital. Canada will continue to defend its values and create more opportunities for people. We'll continue our work here in the Indo-Pacific tomorrow at APEC, and we'll keep focusing on partnerships that will result in more good jobs for Canadians and more opportunities for our businesses. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Prime Minister. We'll be taking 20 minutes of questions. Allons prendre 20 minutes de questions, starting with the CBC.
Hi, Prime Minister. Tom Perry, CBC. We saw a video today of you having an exchange with Xi Jinping, and President Xi seemed to be very upset. He accused you of leaking the contents of a conversation that you two had on the sidelines of the G20. I'm just wondering, why was President Xi so upset? Was this a misunderstanding? Did you offer him some kind of assurances that you wouldn't talk about this?
First of all, not every conversation is always going to be easy, but it's extremely important that we continue to stand up for the things that are important for Canadians. This is something we always do, and we will continue to. I highlighted areas in which we can and should be working together. A good example is the Nature COP15, being held in Montreal over the coming weeks. At the same time, as I highlighted, areas of mutual concern, geopolitical challenges from the war in Ukraine to the situation in North Korea. I also highlighted things of preoccupations to Canadians, like the question of interference with our citizens, and highlighted that it's important that we be able to have dialogue about this. But part of our values as Canadians is being open and frank about the conversations we have, keeping Canadians involved and apprised of what it is that we're doing and the conversations we're having here, and that's exactly what I did.
Why do you think, though, I mean, why do you think he was so upset? What was the message that he was trying to get across to you? Do you think this was a power play of some kind?
We know that China is an important global player in the economy and has a very big impact on events around the world. And Canada needs to be able to engage constructively and directly on areas we can work together, while at the same time we continue to be there to challenge on human rights, on values and principles that matter to Canadians, and look to advance the interests of Canadians. And this is something that we're going to consistently do in a clear and hopefully a constructive way.
Prochaine question.
Bonjour, M. Trudeau, Louis Blouin de Radio-Canada. C'est rare quand même qu'on voit le président chinois comme ça rabrouer un autre chef d'État devant les caméras. J'aimerais savoir, pensez-vous que ça a le potentiel d'endommager encore plus notre relation avec la Chine?
Écoutez, je pense que les gens savent très bien que pas toutes les conversations vont toujours être faciles avec les autres chefs, surtout quand il y a des enjeux qui sont source de différends. Mais comme on est en train de démontrer avec notre stratégie Indo-Pacifique, il y a des enjeux sur lesquels on va vouloir travailler de façon constructive avec la Chine, que ce soit pour lutter contre les changements climatiques, comme par rapport à la COP 15 qu'on est en train d'accueillir à Montréal dans quelques semaines, que ce soit sur des enjeux globaux comme la guerre en Ukraine ou la situation en Corée du Nord. Mais il y a aussi des enjeux sur lesquels on va devoir démontrer nos préoccupations, comme dans le cas d'interférences avec nos citoyens, pour lesquels il va falloir qu'on ait un dialogue, qu'on puisse s'entretenir de façon directe et des fois corsée sur des enjeux préoccupants. Donc, ça va avec l'importance d'avoir des conversations face à face et on va continuer d'être là pour être ferme sur les intérêts des Canadiens.
Qu'est-ce que sa réaction vous a appris sur lui?
Je pense que il y a une réalité que nos systèmes sont très différents. Moi, je prends régulièrement des questions des médias. Je ne suis pas offusqué quand on me met au défi. Je suis là pour partager avec les Canadiens à fond de ma pensée, mes réflexions sur comment on va avancer, parce que c'est ce qu'on fait dans une démocratie. Et c'est un système très différent en Chine. Je pense qu'il n'y a pas toujours l'habitude de l'ouverture qu'un chef démocratique peut et doit avoir avec ses citoyens.
Next question.
Hi, Mr. Trudeau. Mackenzie Gray with Global. I just want to be clear in your conversations with Xi Jinping. You've been saying that you discussed interference with our citizens. I just want to drill down. Did you bring up election interference with Xi Jinping?
I think there's something really important that Canadians need to be reassured by. On the issue of elections interference, in the run-up to the 2019 election, we established a commission composed of top officials and experts to watch carefully, to analyze carefully everything going on during the election, and to report back to Canadians on the integrity of those election processes. And both for the 2019 and 2021 elections, those experts were confident that the elections in Canada unfolded in the right way and that Canadians can be reassured of that. Their reports are clear. So Canadians can and must be reassured that yes, foreign interference is an issue in a lot of different ways, as we've seen all around the world, but the integrity of Canada's elections have not been compromised.
Following up.
So did you raise election interference with Xi Jinping?
I raised the issue of interference with our citizens and expressed that it's important that we continue to have dialogue about that. Okay. J'ai souligné à quel point c'est important de continuer de discuter et d'avoir des conversations franches sur l'enjeu d'interférence avec nos citoyens. Et la réalité, et je veux rassurer les Canadiens encore une fois, qu'à l'approche des élections de 2019, on a mis en place un comité composé d'experts et de gens très haut placés qui avait comme responsabilité de suivre de façon objective et profonde ce qui se passait pendant nos élections pour pouvoir souligner des enjeux s'ils arrivaient et, après le coup, rassurer les Canadiens de l'intégrité des processus électoraux. Et dans les élections de 2019 et dans les élections de 2021, ce comité a pu rapporter aux Canadiens que nos processus et nos élections se sont déroulés de la bonne façon et qu'ils étaient intègres.
Next question.
Hello, Prime Minister. Reuters is reporting that the U.S. president told G7 and NATO members that the missile blast in Poland was actually caused by a Ukrainian air defense missile. Is that what he told you?
There is no confirmation of exactly what happened yet. There needs to be a proper investigation, and that is what's going to happen. But I can tell you that one thing is absolutely clear. Whether it was direct or indirect responsibility, Russia is responsible for what happened because Russia chose to launch over 100 missiles into Ukraine yesterday while we were gathering, leaders of the largest economies in the world were gathering to talk about the consequences of this illegal war on the global economy, to call for peace, call for an end to the conflict. And Russia chose to thumb its nose at that and launch attacks against civilians and civilian infrastructure like power dams and power centers and water reservoirs and civilians. So regardless of what the investigation finds, as I told President Zelensky a few hours ago, we know that the responsibility for all the loss of life, not just over the past couple of days, but over the past many months, is entirely and wholly in Vladimir Putin.
So just so that I have it correct, you're saying that the U.S. president did not tell you that it was caused by a Ukrainian air defense missile. And did that possibility come up at all with the Ukrainian president? Did he provide any context on what may have happened?
There are a number of different possibilities as to what caused the explosion in Poland. And the investigation that is ongoing will be rigorous and will get to the bottom of exactly how it happened. But regardless of exactly how it happened, which we do not know yet, there are theories, but we're making sure that we know for sure, regardless of the details of how it happened, the ultimate responsibility lies with Vladimir Putin and the Russian decision to launch an illegal and unjustifiable war against Ukraine, and more specifically, over the past couple of days, launching over 100 missiles in a terrifying attack against civilians in Ukraine in violation of all international law. On a discuté ce matin de plusieurs possibilités et de théories sur comment cette explosion en Pologne aurait pu se produire. Et je pense que les gens peuvent imaginer, il y a différents scénarios possibles. Et ça va prendre une enquête rigoureuse pour confirmer ce qui s'est passé. Et je pense qu'on doit tous faire attention de ne pas sauter à différentes conclusions. Mais ce qu'on sait déjà, c'est que l'ultime responsabilité pour ce qui s'est passé en Pologne, l'ultime responsabilité pour tous les décès qu'on a vus, pas seulement dans les derniers jours, mais au cours des derniers mois, reviennent à Vladimir Poutine et sa décision de lancer une invasion illégale et injustifiée contre le peuple ukrainien et d'utiliser plus qu'une centaine de missiles contre des civils et des cibles d'infrastructures civiles.
Next question.
Hi, Prime Minister Rafi Boudjikanian, CBC News. Do you consider this G20 a failure because not all member states condemned the war in Ukraine?
I think we knew going into this that there was going to be a range of perspectives around the G20 table. That's one of the things that makes the G20 different and particular as compared to a G7, where we are all very much aligned in perspectives and values. The G20 is a gathering of significant economies from around the world, all with different perspectives. And the fact that we came out of it with a strong and clear communique, and the fact that most countries were very, very clear that so many of the problems facing the world right now, from food shortages to energy crises to global inflation, have been either caused or exacerbated by Russia's illegal attacks and invasion on Ukraine. This was an opportunity for us to come together and address these challenges head-on and face-to-face. And I think it was an extremely important thing because, as Canadians well know, global challenges need to have global solutions, and that's exactly what we were working on.
And speaking of clarity, who are the member states that did not agree to condemn the war, and how forcefully did they disagree?
I think, as you saw from the communique, the countries that, as we repeated the vote at the UN, the vast majority of countries stood up and condemned Russia's illegal attacks on Ukraine at the UN, and that was repeated again in the communique here. We know that the challenges the world is facing have all been either caused or aggravated by Putin's decision to launch an illegal and unjustifiable war against a peaceful neighbor. On sait très bien que l'impact de la guerre illégale de la Russie en Ukraine fait mal à des gens partout dans le monde. Et qu'on ait pu se rassembler en tant que G20 avec des perspectives très différentes à l'intérieur de ces 20 pays, mais quand même de venir à un consensus ou à un communiqué commun où nous soulignons à quel point la majorité d'entre nous souligne le rôle de la Russie dans cette instabilité globale, est un succès. Nous allons continuer de travailler, nous allons continuer de souligner à quel point nous devons de travailler ensemble. Mais je pense que ces occasions de se regarder dans les yeux pour parler des vraies choses, c'est toujours important pour tous nos citoyens.
Next question.
Dylan Robertson with the Canadian Press. Prime Minister, could you please give us a rundown of which countries outside of the G7 you were able to work with? Did India help you to get that language on Russia into the communique? And are you saying that the UN abstentions are the ones who dissented?
What I can say is the process around coming to a consensus or coming to an agreed on communique at the G20 is never an easy one, particularly not when there are big issues impacting on the global economy that have a range of different actors and countries looking at differently around the world. But the work particularly that Indonesia did, and I need to recognize President Widodo once again for his leadership on this in bringing together a text that all could agree on. All members of the G20 worked and came to something that we could agree on and put out as a strong statement from the G20, and that is a credit to everyone who worked at it around the table, particularly the Indonesian presidency.
Going back to China, President Xi told you that the way that you've proceeded is not acceptable, it can't be repeated. Do you actually see a problem here? Because in the video you seem to be dismissing that concern.
Canada trusts its citizens with information about the conversations that we have in their name as a government. I think it's important that Canadians in a democracy, that citizens in a democracy, be apprised of the work that leaders are doing on their behalf, and I won't shy away from being open with Canadians, even as we discuss important and sometimes delicate subjects. Getting the balance right between being open about disagreements and issues we raised, while being able to work constructively at the same time, is something that people have to understand is what Canadians will always do.
We'll take one last question with follow-up.
Hi, James Griffiths, The Globe and Mail. Earlier you spoke about the importance of dialogue, but you seem to be something of an exception when it comes to a lot of your allies and not having a formal bilateral with President Xi. Given the exchanges that we did see and we have been talking about, do you feel isolated given other allies, including other countries, including many of Canada's allies, appear to be building closer ties with China at the moment? Do you think Ottawa's being left out in the cold?
I think there is a clear consensus around G7 allies and others that we need to engage constructively with China on a number of issues, whether it's economic opportunities for our businesses and citizens, whether it's collaborating on climate change, as we are with the Nature COP coming up in Montreal, or dealing with geopolitical instability, whether it's the war, Russia's war in Ukraine, or concerns around North Korea. At the same time as we are there to highlight challenges around human rights, challenges around interference. These are things that we need to have direct conversations on, and Canada will continue to have those.
Following up.
Okay, Prime Minister, I'm Agnes Theodora from Kompas Daily from Indonesia. My first question is, in the middle of the rising geopolitical tension and especially the uncertain economic outlook next year, how challenging is it going to be to implement the commitments and concrete actions that is already made by the leaders in this summit? That's my first question. And I have a second question also. Indonesia and Canada have negotiated for a comprehensive economic trade agreement for over 2 years, and it is said that the negotiation will be concluded in 2023. After coming to Bali and met with President Joko Widodo, do you think that the negotiation can be accomplished? Thank you.
First of all, I agree with you that the 20 is an ambitious one, and it's a credit to President Widodo for having brought us forward and worked together on the big issues facing people around the world. And that's what the G20 is supposed to be about, setting ambitious goals for us to work together and following up on them. And yes, he set the bar high, but as he needs to. We know that the challenges facing countries like Indonesia, but countries around the world who aren't all represented at the G20 table, whether it's climate change, whether it's energy security in a low-carbon world or a zero-carbon world, whether it's opportunities for citizens to grow and have good jobs and support their families, require the world to work together. And we are committed, as we laid out there, in doing that work. We look forward to continuing it into the coming years. On the issue of the free trade agreement with Indonesia, Canada's very excited about that. We've seen tremendous potential for growth in Indonesia. We've seen an alignment in values, whether it's caring about the environment, whether it's building a better future for citizens, whether it's ensuring that trade benefits everyone. These are the things that are important to Canada. One of the reasons we were able to sign free trade deals with so many different countries during an era of protectionism and nativism over the past few years is because we always put the emphasis on making sure that those benefits of trade are shared amongst the population, that not be just the biggest businesses or governments that benefit from freer trade, but that small businesses and workers and women and Indigenous peoples and the environment also benefits when we sign trade deals. And it's with that approach in mind that trade must be win-win, not just for each country, but for all the citizens in each country, which guides us moving forward, and that very much aligns with Indonesia's perspective on how free trade deals need to work for the people of Indonesia. So I look forward very much to continuing our work on free trade with Indonesia.
Merci beaucoup. C'est ce qui m'a fait la conférence de presse d'aujourd'hui. This is
Merci
what
tout le monde.
person.